Welcome, everybody. This is another edition of the Fast Break. We are presented by Dunkin' Donuts. I am Casey Johnson, and we are taping this after that ugly performance in New Orleans. Thanksgiving is on the horizon, and here are the 4 storylines I'm going to be checking out most closely this week. Number 1, when are the Bulls going to respond defensively to 𝗵𝗂𝗶𝗹 comments? Yes, that was a pretty atypical walk-off interview, I'm not going to lie. Saturday night at the United Center following that underwhelming victory over the Washington Wizards. Look, the Bulls have played the worst team in the NBA and escaped with a narrow home victory, and then the worst team in the Western Conference and got drubbed, allowing 143 points. This is a stretch of the schedule where the Bulls have the opportunity to make some hay. They are playing the Charlotte Hornets and the Indiana Pacers back-to-back this weekend. Both those teams are near the bottom of the Eastern Conference, following a trip to Orlando, which ends a 4-game trip. Next week, late, they have home games against the Indiana Pacers and the Brooklyn Nets. But look, these same teams are sitting at home going, we have an opportunity to defeat the undermanned and wounded Chicago Bulls, because the Bulls are bleeding defensively right now. And look, I've talked to a lot of players about this. They are not stacked with individual elite one-on-one defenders. They are not the Oklahoma City Thunder, obviously. But what did we see earlier this season? We saw much more responsible team defense. We saw much more connectivity. We saw much more physicality. Now, the Bulls are probably not a 5-0 team or a 6-1 team, which we saw to start the season, but they're certainly not as bad as what we witnessed in allowing 143 points to the NBA's lowest scoring offensive team in the New Orleans Pelicans. So look, the Bulls have nowhere to go except to look inward. 𝗵𝗂𝗶𝗹 challenged his team with that walk-off interview, and again with his comments from inside the locker room Saturday night in the United Center, and they came out with a flat response in New Orleans. So they're going to take today off. We're taping this on a Tuesday. They're going to practice with a contact practice on Wednesday, and then take Thanksgiving off and enter that back-to-back. What do they need to do defensively? Well, it starts with controlling the basketball. They are really, really struggling with point of attack right now. I talked to Kobe White about this. He says he absolutely needs to be better individually on the ball. Josh Giddey has told me the same thing. Obviously, 𝗦𝗨cie High𝗁𝗄𝗯 has been out the last couple games, and he is their best individual defender. But this is, again, not an individual defensive situation. This is a team defensive situation. We saw better connectivity and physicality to start the season. That has gone by the wayside, and the Bulls need to figure it out quickly. That was an ugly performance in New Orleans, allowing 78 points in the paint, 30 second chance points. You saw Billy Donovan try a bunch of different combinations, including a small ball lineup to start the game with 𝗵𝗂𝗶𝗹 sidelined with knee soreness. He had no answers defensively. I don't know where it can go from here except up, because the Bulls, as of this taping, are the 22nd ranked defense in the NBA. Their defensive rating has plummeted since that strong start where they were in the top 10. And look, we saw the Bulls go through an offensive transformation last season. They moved from the half-court centric offense centered around DeMar DeRozan to one of the fastest-paced teams in the league. That offensive transformation was pretty seamless and pretty powerful. What did we hear from the first day of training camp onward this season? We heard there was going to be a new defensive identity, and we saw it again in better form than what we're seeing currently to start this season. So the Bulls obviously need to get back to that. The defensive transformation is taking a little bit longer than the offensive transformation from a season ago, and it's on the Bulls to fix it, or there's going to be more performances like what we saw in New Orleans, and that would not be a good thing. All right, number 2, how will Modest Buzelis respond? This is, I don't want to over-dramatize this, but this was a storyline coming out of that New Orleans game. Billy Donovan, for matchup reasons and rebounding reasons, inserted Jalen Smith to start the second half. But he did not pick Patrick Williams to take out of the starting lineup, who was starting in place for the injured 𝗵𝗂 he chose 𝗦𝗵 Buzelis. Now, this is all part of the continuing education and maturation of the second-year forward that the Bulls have very, very high hopes for. Billy Donovan has said many times he wants to see 𝗦𝗵 Buzelis move off the athletic plays and the three-point shooting that he knows he can do and turn into a more complete basketball player that impacts games in multiple ways. That starts with more defensive responsibility, that starts with more physicality, that starts with more defensive responsibility. 𝗦𝗵 has struggled at times with the physicality piece and the fouling. He's fouled out of 2 games already. And the fact that Billy Donovan chose 𝗦𝗵 Buzelis and not Patrick Williams to take out of that second half starting lineup in New Orleans, to me is significant in the short term because it again speaks to how the Bulls want to see more from 𝗦𝗵 from a rebounding component. The Bulls were getting crushed on the glass in New Orleans, and 𝗦𝗵 was not holding up his part. Kendall Gill had a fantastic breakdown on our post-game show where he talked about 𝗦𝗵 Buzelis needing a lower, more physical base, kind of using his forearm to get into players. And I've talked to 𝗦𝗵 about his need and desire to get into bodies earlier in defensive plays and also more physically get over screens, fight for position, those kind of things. Again, we're not burying the guy. This is part of his education and maturation as a second-year player. But for a guy who has said before the season that he wants to be coached as an all-defensive team member, there's a lot on his plate right now, and there's a lot of room for him to grow. I've always liked 𝗦𝗵 Buzelis' weak side awareness. I think it's pretty advanced for someone of his age. His shot blocking has been very good through the early stages of this season. But in terms of one-on-one defending and physicality, he has struggled at times, and that has led to foul trouble, and that led to his second half benching in New Orleans. He came in at the 7:34 mark of the third quarter. And again, small story, but it's a storyline to monitor. Let's see how 𝗦𝗵 Buzelis responds Friday night in Charlotte and Saturday night in Indiana with that back-to-back. All right, third storyline. Zach Collins, I'm not, anointing him as the savior, but he's certainly going to help. Here's the plan for Zach Collins, who obviously has yet to make his season debut. Bulls are off today following that debacle in New Orleans. They will have a contact practice Wednesday at the Advocate Center. Zach Collins is scheduled to participate in that contact practice. The Bulls will take Thursday off for Thanksgiving and then go into that back-to-back Saturday. Zach Collins will continue to do individual work over Friday and Saturday, assuming he comes out of that contact practice okay. And then the window of opportunity opens for him, not with that next week game Monday in Orlando, but the 2 home games following that, Wednesday and Friday back here at the United Center. So what can we expect if that occurs? Zach Collins, to me, was one of the best defenders for the Bulls during the preseason. He was playing at an extremely high level before that unfortunate fracture of the wrist, taking a charge from Julius Randle. And how fitting is it that he got an injury while taking a charge? Because that's exactly the kind of defense that Billy Donovan and the coaching staff have been asking for, putting bodies into place, sacrificing your body for the team, taking charges, rim protection, physicality. These are all boxes that Zach Collins has checked very consistently throughout his career and was checking with authority during that preseason, where I thought he was one of the Bulls' best players, and I thought actually he was going to play a pretty significant role. In fact, I would hazard to say that there was even some discussion potentially of him closing some games, and Billy Donovan has talked about utilizing different closing lineups depending on how the game is going, the matchups are going, and players are faring. Now, 𝗵𝗂 got off to a very strong start offensively this season. He's obviously been huge in the clutch with those 2 outright game winners and that late big three-pointer in Denver. So again, I don't want to overstate Zach Collins' return to the lineup because Jalen Smith has also played at a pretty high level, but he will be a welcomed addition, particularly at the defensive end. If he is able to return next week, he also allows Billy Donovan and the coaching staff the opportunity to try some double big lineups. And look, with the way the Bulls are getting crushed in terms of second chance points and in terms of physicality, that's actually a good development. So I can see Billy Donovan trying some double big lineups with Zach Collins, and that's why I'm going to be monitoring his return to the contact practice court on Wednesday and moving forward pretty closely. All right, our last topic for this week is, I don't want to get too doom and gloom here, but let's say the Bulls' defensive woes continue. Let's say the Bulls continue to hover around 500. I have all along asked the question, what is going to be management's approach to this season? My personal feeling and reporting has led me to believe that the Bulls are going to take a wait and see approach with this season, but and maybe visit things closer to the February trade deadline. But if they keep scuffling, do they get out ahead of certain situations? Billy Donovan has been pretty consistent talking about how there are 8 players on expiring contracts. He's talking about it in the context of, are guys going to be playing selfishly or committing to the team? There's going to be an element of sacrifice this season. You've seen this team be very connected. They're a very close team. So the contract situation they're putting on the back burner as far as individual basis. But management's got to take a big picture approach, right? And do they get a little bit more aggressive if the team starts scuffling in these early stages and get out ahead of some of these expiring contract situations? We've all along, dating back to last offseason with these fast break episodes, been centered on Coby White and 𝗬𝗎 They're the two that would attract the most trade interest from my perspective and the people I talk to around the league. And I want to emphasize here, I'm not reporting this. This is me playing with the trade machine, but it's pretty easy to think of some Coby White trades. And I know that he would be in demand if the Bulls put him into play. You look in the Houston Rockets with losing Fred VanVleet, and obviously Reed Sheppard has stepped in pretty admirably. But there's a situation that could potentially need a guard. The Minnesota Timberwolves, they've been back-to-back Western Conference finalists. They're starting Donte DiVincenzo at point guard. He's not a point guard. Mike Conley has been relegated to a bench role. He's kind of in the later stages of his career. He sometimes hasn't even really played at all. Is there a potential marriage there? I mean, you could play with the trade machine and build a trade pretty quickly for Coby White and the Minnesota Timberwolves if that were to be something that both teams visited. Donte DiVincenzo would be one candidate there. Maybe Terrence Shannon Jr., the hometown product, who I know the Bulls had some interest leading up to that draft in. Again, the question is, how aggressive do teams get? How aggressive do the Bulls get? Because my initial thoughts going into this season were the Bulls were going to kind of wait and see where the team was as they got closer to the February trade deadline. But some of these recent performances have been pretty alarming. Does that expedite management's timeline? Does that make them get out ahead of one of these situations again? Aggregators beware. This is all speculation here, but it's certainly something to consider if the Bulls' fortunes continue to kind of trend poorly on the defensive end and lead to some of these unfortunate losses. It's weird that we're saying all this when the Bulls are over 500, but they are the only NBA team with a negative net rating that is over 500. So, but a pretty funky start to this season thus far through 17 games. And that's why it's certainly fair to speculate about what management's approach is going to be between now and the February trade deadline. All right, we are on our banner bull feature for the week. You guys know it by now. This is week 4. I'm 1 for 3 going into this week. And actually, we'll have to analyze how I did because I picked Josh Giddey for last week. So I want to give myself maybe 1.5 out of 4. He averaged 16.8 points, 8.8 rebounds, 9.8 assists, shot 47.4% from 3. Those are all good things, but Bulls were 2-2 on the week. Josh didn't really impact winning as much as he has. It's funny I'm saying that when he actually almost averaged a triple-double. I probably should have picked 𝗬𝗎 for the second straight week. He's been the best Bull. But look, the one takeaway from Josh Giddey is that three-point shooting looks like it's here to stay, and all credit goes to him. There was that knock on him that he was not a great three-point shooter coming from Oklahoma City. He's really, really worked on that shot. Picked it up at the second half of last season. Through 17 games, he's at 38.8% on a career high volume. So all credit goes to Josh Giddey for working on that shot. When he lines it up now, he's shooting it with authority, without hesitating. You almost expect it to go in. He's shooting above league average. So kudos to Josh Giddey for that. But I'm only going to give myself half credit for this last week's pick for the Banner Bull. My pick for this coming week, Coby White. Look at this, man. Coby, through 4 games, is averaging 24 points, 6.8 assists. He's shooting 37% on 3. And the best part is, when I talk to Coby, he's actually pretty down on the way he's playing. He thinks he's been very loose with his handle. He thinks he's committing too many turnovers, has had some sloppy passes. He thinks he can be much better at both ends, but particularly at the offensive end. So if you've got a guy who's not pleased with 24 points and 6.8 assists, that is obviously a good thing if you're a Bulls fan. And that's why Coby White is my Banner Bull pick for this coming week. We'll see how I do next week, and that's what we'll be back for more content. And we certainly appreciate you checking out this week's edition of the Fast Break. We are presented by Dunkin' Donuts, and we will catch you next time.